Have you ever walked into a house where something felt off? Ethan Caldwell thought it would be just another routine case, a concerned report, a few questions, and a standard write-up. But what he uncovered inside that seemingly perfect Victorian home would haunt him forever. This is the chilling story of Julian Bradley, a boy no one knew existed, and who might never have been meant to exist at all.
Ethan Caldwell had long since abandoned his dreams of being a teacher. Life had a way of pulling you down paths you never intended, and for Ethan, that path led to Chicago's child services. He had spent 15 years diving into the lives of families, some broken, some barely hanging on, to protect the children who often couldn't protect themselves. It was a job that alternated between feeling like a calling and a curse. But nothing could have prepared him for the Bradleys. The file came across his desk on a sweltering July morning. A peculiar anomaly, flagged by a family pediatrician, Julian Bradley, an 8-year-old boy who seemed to exist only on paper. No medical visits, no school enrollment, no records beyond his name in the clinic's database. And even that had been a fluke, discovered during a routine data transfer. The Bradley residence was the kind of home that belonged on the cover of a glossy magazine, a towering Victorian with immaculate landscaping and an air of quiet wealth. Thomas Bradley was a senior post office director. His wife, Laura, owned a popular pastry shop in the city. On the surface, they were the picture of upper-class perfection. Ethan parked his car and approached the door, his unease growing with every step. When Laura answered, the first thing Ethan noticed was her age, or rather, how much older she looked than the 39 years listed in the file. Her pale, drawn face and hollow eyes spoke of years of exhaustion. Though the smile she attempted was polite enough, Thomas Bradley, sitting stiffly in the living room, looked no better. There was a vacancy in his expression, as if he were going through the motions of being alive. Ethan introduced himself, explaining why he was there. Before he could delve into his list of questions, Thomas cut him off. "You're here because of Julian," he said flatly. "You want to know why he doesn't go to school, why no one's ever seen him, why he doesn't play with other kids." Laura let out a choked sob. "You want answers? Go upstairs and talk to him yourself," she whispered, her voice trembling with something that wasn't just sadness. It was fear. Ethan knocked softly on the door. "Julian, it's Ethan. I need to talk to you for a moment. Can I come in?" "It's open," came the reply, calm but unnervingly flat, from the other side of the door. Ethan pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was cloaked in darkness, with thick shutters blocking any sunlight. Julian sat cross-legged on the bed, a small flashlight in hand, its beam illuminating the comic book he was reading. He didn't even glance up as Ethan entered. "You like comics?" Ethan asked, trying to ease into the conversation. Julian's response was delayed, deliberate. Without looking up, he finally said, "I don't need school. I already know everything I need to know." Ethan pulled a chair closer and sat down, choosing his words carefully. "I see. But school isn't just about learning facts. It's also about meeting other kids, making friends, having fun." Julian's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It wasn't the kind of smile that came with joy. It felt rehearsed, calculated. "Friends," Julian said softly, his voice taking on a peculiar guttural resonance that didn't belong in a child's throat. "That might be interesting." Ethan felt his chest tighten. "It could be," he said cautiously, trying to read the boy's expression. Julian finally lifted his head, the faint light catching his eyes. They were strange, off in a way Ethan couldn't immediately pinpoint. There was a glimmer there, something unnatural that made the small hairs on his neck stand up. For example, Julian continued, his tone still polite but with a sharpness that cut through the air. Your son, what's his name again? Oh, right, Noah. And he goes to Lincoln Elementary, doesn't he? Ethan froze, his pulse racing. How do you know about Noah? Julian's small smile widened slightly. His teeth seemed sharper now, or maybe it was a trick of the light. I know a lot of things, Ethan. About you, about your family, about everyone. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to mask the panic rising in his chest. Listen, Julian, I'm just here to help. That's all. Oh, I know, Julian interrupted, his voice no longer sounding like that of an 8-year-old boy. It was deeper, more resonant, carrying a weight that made Ethan's insides churn. And I appreciate it. Really, I do. But let me give you some advice. Julian leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. They were darker now, almost entirely black, with only the faintest ring of white remaining around the edges. Don't talk about me. Don't tell anyone what you've seen or heard here today. Just go back to your office, write your report and tell them everything is fine, that the Bradley family is perfectly normal. Can you do that for me? Ethan's mouth went dry. He nodded automatically, not trusting his voice to come out steady. Good, Julian said, sitting back and returning his gaze to the comic book. Because if you don't... His voice softened to a whisper, but it carried a threat that chilled Ethan to the bone.
Well, maybe I'll pay a visit to Noah. He seems like a nice boy. I'd like to meet him.
Ethan rose to his feet, his legs trembling beneath him. He wanted to say something, anything, but his throat felt locked shut.
You can go now,
Julian said without looking up, his voice now entirely inhuman, a low, rumbling echo that seemed to vibrate through the room. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He turned and left the room, his heart pounding in his ears as he shut the door behind him. Back downstairs, Ethan confronted Thomas and Laura. Your son, he began, choosing his words carefully, is unusual. I don't know what's going on here, but you need to explain. Laura dissolved into tears. We've tried, she sobbed. We've tried to love him, to protect him, but he's not ours, not really. Thomas's expression darkened. He's not a child. He's something else. Something that looks like a child, but isn't. We thought we could handle it, that we could raise him like any other boy, but now it's too late, Laura whispered. Ethan stared at them, his mind racing. Were they delusional, abusive? Or was there a sliver of truth in their terror? You're saying Julian isn't human? He asked, his voice barely audible. Thomas nodded. Call us crazy, call the police, do whatever you need to do, but nothing you say or do will change what he is, or what he'll become. Ethan sat at his desk, staring at the blank page of the report on his computer. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling slightly. The events of that day in the Bradley home played over and over in his mind. The child, no, the thing that spoke to him in that cold, garbled voice had made its message clear. He had no choice. He had to play along. Taking a deep breath, he began typing. The Bradley family appears stable and well-adjusted. Julian Bradley is a bright and polite young boy. No further action is required. His stomach twisted as he typed the words, but he couldn't stop. He had promised Julian, or, more accurately, he had been commanded by Julian. And in the back of his mind, the sound of the boy's voice, soft, calculating and inhuman, echoed ominously. Maybe I'll pay a visit to Noah. Ethan closed the document and leaned back in his chair. He told himself it was over, that he had done what he needed to do to keep his family safe, but the weight of the secret felt suffocating. A few weeks later, Ethan received a call from a colleague. His face went pale as he listened. An accident? He repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Who survived? Just the father. Thomas Bradley. The voice on the other end of the line confirmed. Laura and Julian didn't make it. It was a bad crash, Ethan. Head-on collision with a semi. They didn't stand a chance. Ethan hung up the phone, his mind racing. His first reaction was relief, a flood of it, so intense that it left him light-headed. The Bradleys had done it. They had stopped Julian. They must have known what he was, what he could do, and they had sacrificed themselves to end the nightmare. But guilt followed quickly behind the relief. They died to protect the world from the thing that lived in their son. Ethan had kept quiet, had done nothing, and now he would have to live with that. Or so he thought. The Bradley home felt different when Ethan arrived. It wasn't just the absence of Laura and Julian, it was the house itself. The windows were shut tight, the curtains drawn. The air around the property felt heavy, oppressive. Thomas answered the door, his face gaunt and pale. His eyes, once warm and expressive, were now shadowed and unreadable. He stepped aside silently, letting Ethan enter. Thomas, Ethan began, his voice shaky. I'm so sorry for your loss. I can't even imagine. Thomas cut him off with a faint, humorless smile. You're here for the truth, aren't you? Ethan froze. I don't understand. Thomas chuckled, low and hollow. Sure you do. You want to know what happened that night. Why the accident happened. Why I'm still here. Ethan nodded slowly, the hairs on the back of his neck standing on end. Thomas leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. We didn't crash by accident, Ethan. It was him, Julian. He made it happen. Ethan's breath caught. But he's gone. No. Thomas interrupted, his smile widening. It wasn't a comforting smile. It was too sharp, too knowing. He's not gone. He's here. Ethan took a step back, his heart pounding. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Thomas's movements were too fluid, his posture too relaxed. And then there were his eyes. They weren't Thomas's eyes. He needed a new vessel, Thomas continued, his voice deepening, distorting into something Ethan didn't recognize. Something stronger, something older. Ethan stumbled back toward the door, but Thomas was faster. He blocked the exit, his smile twisting into something cruel. You should have left it alone, Ethan. You should have kept your mouth shut, filed your report, and moved on. But now you've gone and made me curious. Ethan's voice shook as he whispered, Please, don't hurt my family. Thomas tilted his head, feigning thoughtfulness. Your family? Oh, you mean Noah, sweet kid. I hear he's on a school trip today. Ethan's blood ran cold. Long bus ride, isn't it? Lots of sharp turns, narrow roads. Thomas's voice trailed off, leaving the rest unspoken. Ethan's legs gave out and he collapsed onto the floor. Thomas, or whatever wore Thomas's skin, knelt down beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder. Don't worry, Ethan, the thing said softly. I'm not going to kill you. Not yet. You've got plenty of time to think about what you've done. But your son... Thomas leaned in closer, his breath hot against Ethan's ear. Well, let's just say you'd better hope the driver is careful. The last thing Ethan heard as the door slammed shut behind him was Thomas's laughter, low, guttural, and utterly inhuman. Hours later, Ethan sat in his car, parked along the ridge overlooking the valley below. The winding road stretched out like a thread, disappearing into the dense forest beyond. He gripped the steering wheel, white-knuckled, as he waited for the school bus to appear. It was nearly dusk when he saw it, its yellow exterior glowing faintly in the fading light. Relief flooded him for a fleeting moment. Noah was safe. They were almost home. But then, the brake lights flickered unnaturally, almost as if they were winking at him. Ethan's heart stopped as the bus began to veer, slowly but deliberately, toward the edge of the road. "No!" he screamed, fumbling for his car key. Before he could start the engine, the bus came to an abrupt halt. It teetered on the edge for what felt like an eternity before settling back onto the road. Ethan let out a shuddering breath, but the relief didn't last. As the bus continued on its way, Ethan saw a figure standing on the ridge opposite him. It was Thomas, or whatever wore Thomas's face now, watching him with a twisted grin. Ethan knew, in that moment, that this was only the beginning. The entity had no intention of killing Noah, not yet. It wanted him to suffer, to live with the knowledge that he could lose everything at any moment. And Ethan realized the horrifying truth. The Bradley family hadn't just sacrificed themselves to stop Julian. They had failed, and now the thing that had lived inside their son had evolved, taking on a new form, a new host. It was free to move through the world, to spread its influence, to hunt. Ethan whispered to himself, "I should have told someone. I should have warned them." But it was too late.
Would you have kept the secret to save your family, or would you have risked everything to stop the horror? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Stay tuned for more chilling tales. Until next time, stay safe. And always watch the shadows. And remember, the abyss is waiting for you.